Today we're going to go over lesson 12, which is using 3D features. So we're going to actually create a 3D environment in After Effects. We'll look at a 3D scene from multiple views. We'll create 3D layers. We'll look at rotating, positioning layers along the X, Y, and then additional Z axis of the third dimension. We'll use 3D transform gizmo. We'll animate a camera layer. And then we'll go and we'll add ourselves some lights to go in and control shadows and depths. We'll extrude a 3D text and shapes inside of After Effects to give them those dimensions. And then we'll look at Cinema 4D inside of After Effects. So if you go ahead and open up the lesson 12 file, you should find a last leaf in there. So it should have the composition already set for you. And let's just go ahead and do a file save as, save as. So that way we don't overwrite what it is that we have. And I'm just going to place it in this lesson 12 folder underneath a finished project. And instead of the cert file, we're going to go ahead and call this lesson 12 finished, even though it's not finished yet. So now we have ourselves this composition that's been created. We have one individual leaf inside of here. What we're going to do is we're going to bring ourselves in a sky background, which will allow us then to ultimately we're going to animate the leaves as they come through the sky, and then it's going to go back to this whole black concept to give us the logo at the end. So let's go ahead and we're going to our project panel. Let's go ahead and we can double click so we can import. If you navigate out to wherever you have your lesson stored at, inside of the assets, you should find sky.jpg. This is in lesson 12. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to open that into our project. And then let's go ahead and just place that into our composition, putting it at the bottom of the layer stack. Now with that, depending on the size of your composition, size of images that you import, we can see because of the handles going around the outside off the pasteboard that this image is much larger than our composition. So let's go ahead and take that layer, making sure we have it selected inside of our composition. Let's go ahead and take this and adjust it so that way it goes through and it actually fits to the comp. So we're going to go to layer transform. We're going to go ahead and bring it down here to fit to comp. And then you'll notice the handles are going to go around the outside edge. Remember, when we go through and deal with fit to comp, it is going to stretch it. Since we are dealing just simply with the sky, you're not going to notice any difference with the clouds, or at least not anything recognizable as we go through to deal with the clouds. Now once you go through and you create that, we want to go ahead and lock it. So inside of our composition, underneath our lock, we're going to click that. That's just going to keep us from accidentally moving it as we go through and position other objects. We're not going to be able to select that. So now no matter what, if I go out there and click on it, even if I try to click on it down here inside of the composition, you will not be able to select that. Since we have that position, we'll go ahead and we can save that. Now, in order for us to go through and work with something, or at least move something inside of our 3D space, we actually need to make them into a 3D object. As you start working with them, you're familiar with the fact that we're working with an X and a Y, X left to right, Y up and down. But we can't move it along a Z axis, which of course will allow us to go through and push it away from us. So first though, we're going to go in and we're going to start to work with these objects, but we're going to duplicate them and ultimately position things while they're in a 2D setup, because they're a little easier to work with than they are to go in and work in a third dimension. So inside of here we have our last leaf. We're going to go ahead and we're going to select that last leaf layer, and we want to go ahead and we're going to duplicate this. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Command D. When you do that, you're going to see it comes up and gives us a last leaf 2. With that selected, if we go ahead and hit return, it's going to allow us to go ahead and rename this. So we're just going to go ahead and call that red. Now, if you didn't know the shortcut key, you could also come up here to Edit, Duplicate, and that's where you'll see your Command D is available to you up there. So now we've gone in, we've duplicated the last leaf, and then we've renamed that one red. We want to go ahead and give ourselves some additional leaves. So we're going to go ahead and let's add in 5 more leaves. So you'll see it goes from red, just like with the last leaf, went to last leaf 2. We now have red, so we'll go to red 2, 3, 4, 5, and red 6. All we're doing in here is we're just going to create a bunch of copies of this leaf with multiple leaves coming in and moving. Once we get to red 6, we want to go ahead and hit return, and we're going to call this yellow. Now, we aren't changing the colors at this time. We're just simply changing the names of our layers that we are working with. Now, when we go through and we have our layer yellow selected, we need to go ahead and ultimately change what we have for our fill. So when we look at the top of our screen, we're going to see what the fill colors are. So with the one selected that's called yellow, we're going to go ahead and we're going to click on the shape fill color box. We'll have our box show up, and we want to go ahead and choose ourselves a yellow color. Now, you could come through here and you can move this along on the slider for our hue. We could also come out here and work with either HSB or even RGB values. Since they are blue values, we can click on them, or we'll see the scrubby indicator show up, which will allow us to click and drag to the right to increase or to the left to decrease. In this case, we're going to go ahead and use a red 255, green 238, and a blue of 0. We get this nice yellow that's there, and we'll go ahead and click on OK. Since when we duplicate them, it always places the layer above the one that is currently selected. We're going to go ahead and see that you should be able to see the leaf is now yellow, because again, it is the topmost object. So we have that set there. Let's go ahead and let's duplicate this. So we're going to take up all the way up till we see that we have yellow 6 once again. We'll go ahead and rename that yellow 6 layer to orange. Once we have that set, we will also come up and change that color into an orange. Again, you can go through and just simply click to select something, or you can also come in here and fix your RGB values. If you didn't see those, red 255, green of a 120, and blue at 0. I'll give you this orange. Once you have orange set, same thing. Let's go ahead and create 5 duplicate copies of it. And then we'll rename the last one brown. And once again, we'll come in here and we'll work to change our color. As you can see, we can move this around. So again, to select a color. You don't have to choose specific colors. And with this, they use the red of 164, green of 122, and a blue of 85, which gives us this light brown. Once you have that set, in this case, we only need to make 4 copies since we aren't going to create any additional leaves. Once you have those created, you may want to go ahead and save it. So as you go through and you start to create objects, think about ways that you can simplify the process, speed up the process. Think about duplicating objects. Remember that we still have the full ability to go in here and adjust these based on scale. So we can make them narrower, wider, taller, shorter as we go through and work with them. So at this point, we've just gone through, and if you look at your composition, you'll see we now have 21 layers of leaves. And we want to be able to go in and begin to work with these. Now we can go through ultimately, and we will go in and turn these into 3D in that by selecting all of them and just tagging the 3D checkbox in one of them. But before we go through and work with them, it's actually much easier, as I said, to work with these in a two-dimensional form in the sense of to move them around on the composition in 2D to start with than it is to go through and try to work with them in 3D. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and drag all of these off of the pasteboard. So I'm going to come up here, I'm going to click on this, I'm just going to drag these up and off. Now depending on what you have for a view, you may decide to come down here in the corner and change what you have for magnification. So maybe you want to bring this down to 33.3 so that we can see it. Remember, you can also use your scroll wheel to do that as well. So however much space you need, you can go ahead and adjust that. 50% might be enough. And all we're going to do is we're going to simply start to take these and just drag these off of the pasteboard. Now, I'm not going to get them too far off because we're going to animate these all coming on, and they're going to have to travel then based upon what we have set for it. So we're just going to keep working with them. So we're going all the way down until we get to this last leaf. So we have all the red ones off, then we're going to come down to the last leaf. And we want to make sure that we go ahead and we're going to take this last leaf one and we're going to bring it down here in the lower left hand part of our composition. So it allows us to go in and move it into there. Now at this point you may want to go ahead and choose 100%, or you may go ahead and choose fit up to 200% so you can go ahead and see where it's at. This can help as you go through and place exactly where you want to put that last leaf at. Now we've gone through and we've positioned them off the pasteboard. Now we can go ahead and we can click on the red layer. And if we go ahead and come up here to where it says brown 5, if we hold down shift and select that, we do want to make sure that we go through and we're not going to change the last leaf at this time. So we just want red up all the way through brown 5. So everything except for last leaf is now selected. And then we can simply come into here where we see our 3D checkbox there, and we can go ahead and we can click on it in any of the layers, and it will go through and process all of them in. Now once we go through and it processes them, you're going to see this 3D widget show up. That's what this is here. So this is coming up to let us know that we now are working with a three-dimensional layer. So once you see that widget, that's what it means. If we back away from it, you'll see that everything's still in its same place. But since they are selected, what you're going to see is you'll see all these 3D widgets all over the screen. That's because those 3D widgets all are about that layer. So they work off of that individual layer that's there. So now you've just gone in and created three-dimensional objects inside of After Effects. So with all of those still selected, what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to start to work with the properties. Now, if you want to work and be able to see more of your composition, you can go ahead, you can adjust the view. Again, it depends on what you have currently set or how many layers you have or how large you have it on there as to how big you're going to need to make this. So we can adjust that, just allowing us to see what's there. Now we do have a lot of layers, so as we go and we start to work with different properties, you're going to see that it's not even going to be possible to have all of them on there. But everything is currently selected. So what we're going to do is we want to go ahead and go in and be able to see our position properties, our scale properties, and our rotation properties. So we're going to go in and start with the fact that we want to see position. So we're going to hit P. You'll notice that position shows up for all of them. We then remember need to hold down Shift. This allows us to add to it. So we're going to hit S, which is going to give us our scale. And lastly, we're going to hit R to give us our rotation. Now when you see your rotation properties show up, what you're going to notice is that we have an X rotation, a Y rotation, and we also then have that new Z axis that's available to us, that third dimension inside of here. Now as we go in to get started, you want to make sure that your timeline is back at the beginning. So we can see here we have all zeros inside of our timeline. Over here in the timeline view, we can see it's at the beginning. We could also simply hit the home key, which will also make sure that we're back at the beginning of it. So we have this set. We want to go ahead and lock in the position of this and create initial keyframes for our position, for our orientation, and also for our rotation properties. So we're going to come in here, and as I mentioned, we want to go ahead and set it for position. So we're going to click on the stopwatch on any of the position ones. So in this case, I just clicked it on red 3. It will automatically turn on the stopwatch for all of the position ones that are currently selected, which is all of the leaf layers with the exception of the final leaf. So we have position set. We're going to click on orientation. And then we also want to go ahead and toggle on all of our rotation properties. So X, Y, and Z axes for those. So all we've done, we just created initial keyframes at the very beginning of our composition. So with that, they're there. They're all off of the pasteboard, of course, with the exception of our red leaf, or our final leaf is what I should say. So therefore, they're set. So we can go and we start to make changes to these things as we move them. We will be able to adjust those and they will change over time. Now for our scale property, right now they are set at 100%. We can click on any of the values inside of here. And if we go ahead and type in 33 and hit tab, you'll notice that since we have the toggle on here for our lock or constrained proportions, what happens with that is it's automatically going to change everything X, Y, and Z axis as we go through and do that. So as we go through and we start to look at this, once we go through and adjust it, you may notice that you have a leaf that shows up on there. You will want to go ahead and get that leaf off of there. So in this case, I had to click, and I think there's also one right here on mine that just barely showed back up on there. So I'm going to go ahead and move those off of there. Now we don't have to worry about the fact that I just moved it, because even yes, we have on our position, that keyframe for the position, it's still on that same position. We're at the very beginning, it's at the 0 mark. So even though I moved that, all I did was change the location of for the position keyframe of the 2 leaves that I went in and moved. So now they're off of there. So if I go through and I start to scrub, you'll see they don't move anywhere. They're not on here. They're not going to show up inside of the composition at this time because we haven't changed anything based on their keyframes. So let's go ahead and jump out to the 1 second and 20 frame mark. I just went through and dragged the playhead. You could also come over here and key in 120 inside of here to allow us to move out to that location. So in my case, since I had to move a couple of them, I will need to come back in here and select my red, hold down Shift, and select the brown so that I go back in and reselect all of my layers. So we can see they are selected out here. And what we want to do is we want to go in and make some changes to our X, Y, and Z rotations. Now this is going to work a little bit differently in the sense we're not going to come in here and change each one. But what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we see our X rotation. Now what you're going to notice here is there's a number, X, and then degrees. What happens with that is anything before the X indicates how many times it makes a full rotation. Over here for this goes through the degrees. So if you go through and you start to drag this up, you'll see once we get to 360, notice it jumps over to 1x. So as you go through and you start to use that node, that's what we have with this. So if I put this back to 0. So we come in here to our X, Y, and Z rotations. We want everything to rotate 2 full times. So we're just going to go in there and we're going to put 2X for the rotations. So from the first frame of this, so the 0 mark to the 1 second and 20 frame mark, all of the leaves are actually going to go through and rotate 2 full times. So if we toggle back out, and if we go ahead and we deselect all layers, you can press F2 on that or click somewhere in the empty space in the timeline, depending on what keyboard you're working on. If you're working on one of the Macs that has control buttons across the top for your function keys, just to the right of the delete key on the main part of the keyboard, you'll see FN. If you hold down that function key and hit F2, it will then allow you to use the functions that way. Now allow you to go through and deselect all of your layers. Now, with these, if we go ahead and hit the U key, it's going to hide all of the properties that were expanded out. So once again, you should be able to see all of your layers inside of the timeline. At this point, let's go ahead and let's save that. So at this point, if we go through, if we went back to the home part and you went ahead and you played it, you may start to see some leaves showing up on your corners or the tops or the edges. And that's because we do have those go through and they're starting to rotate around there. And based on those 2 rotations and where it actually has defined for the center point, you're going to see that those start to sweep themselves onto the screen. You can also, if you drag it a little bit, you'll see them. So right here, you can see how all of the boxes are rotating. You'll see here the leaves coming into here. That's just because of the way that they move. So it does allow you to go through and start to see how are they going to be moving, where are they at as they begin to move. So at that 120 mark, we're going to go in here, we're going to start to work with each of them. You'll see if we go back and look at it, you'll notice that it comes back around and they appear the same way they initially did, and they are flat, or at least appear flat on the screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to come out here and I'm going to grab any leaf and I'm going to go ahead and bring it onto the screen. So I'm going to bring it out here, drop it somewhere over here on the far side of the screen. So when we go through and we actually bring and drag that out there, if I were to start to play it, you'll see then how that's going to move on to the screen. So what we want to do is we want to be at that 120 mark and we want to bring all of them on here. We want them to all traverse the screen by at least halfway. They can certainly go more than that. And as you're bringing them on, be at least aware of what colors are going where, so you can kind of start to mix them up a bit more. Watch as you select them. If you accidentally grab it by a handle on that, you will scale it out. You may also end up rotating it as well. And my last one. And at this point, if you did want to reposition some of them, you don't like where they're at, some of them you feel didn't traverse far enough across the screen, you can certainly go in and continue to move those. Once you have those set there at 120, you might want to go ahead and see what happens with them. Mine all seem to fall almost from, looks like from kind of the same area. So we'll adjust them if necessary. If you want to move them, you can. Let's go ahead and once you get that set, we're going to jump out here to the 210 mark. So you'll notice that they are all currently in one area. And what we're going to do is we're going to start to shuffle these around a little bit. So let's go in here and we're going to click on the red layer and once again go up and shift click on the brown layer. So all of these are currently selected. Now with them set, we want to go ahead and we're going to adjust the position property. So we're just going to go ahead and press P. Now you'll notice that we have all different positions inside of there. Now what's nice about it is we go in and we start to adjust the value. So we go in and we grab this and we start to scrub through the Y position. Since all of them are selected, they're actually all going to begin to move together. But they're going to move then in relation to where they currently are at. So it's going to be a relative amount as we move them. So you'll see if we come over here on any of the Y values. So remember we have our X, Y, then Z axis. So if we come on the Y and we start to grab those and move to the right, notice that it's pushing them all down. If we continue to move to the right and increase those, and we do that all the way down until all the leaves are off of there. At this point, looks like all of them are off. So I'm going to go ahead and let go of that. So at that 210 mark, now we've just gone through and we've adjusted them so they all fall down. You'll notice that they have maintained their spatial relationships to one another, but all we've done is simply increase those based on that relative amount for it. So once we have that set, we can go ahead and hit P, which will just go ahead and hide our position layers. And we can go ahead and we can deselect. And then if you look at your screen, what you should see then is that all of them are off of there. Even this one here is down far enough that it gets off of my composition. So now if we go ahead and we go back to the home part where we see each one of them on there, we can go ahead and hit the space bar to preview what's going to happen with them. So you can see how they kind of twirl on. Since we had 2 rotations, they come all the way back around to what looks flat, and then they just fall off the bottom of the screen. Now, if you wanted to, you certainly could add in many, many more leaves to this. So let's jump back to that first spot where we went through and had them set. So right now they all have the same appearance to them. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in and select a few of these leaves so we can start to get a little different feel to them. So I'm going to come in here and select one, and I'm just going to go ahead and hold down Shift, and I'm going to come in here and select a few of these different leaves. So I went here and selected 4 of them. Now, as we talked, we do have the little gizmo or widget, depending on what you're looking at in here. So when we come in here and we start to look at it, as we hover over these, what's happening to these. So when we come in here and start to deal with rotating. What are we rotating? What are we changing? And if we come in here and we start to work with these, can we come in here and change rotations? Yes, we can grab a hold of this and we can start to work with this. So you'll see on the Z axis, what are we going through and rotating? So we can do that on the gizmo that way. We can grab the Y and we can go like this, and you'll see how they start to change. So what's happening is we're rotating this around the Y axis. So that pin straight down top to bottom is what it's rotating around. Come in here and we start to look, again, X. You'll see it's going to rotate. So from left to right. And then, like we said, we were on the Z axis here. See how it swings around. So we can go through inside of here, or we can also come back over here with them selected, and we can go ahead and hit R to give us our rotation values. Now with those that we have selected, they're the only ones that actually bring out what we have for our control. So here we see our X rotation. We can go ahead and say we want this to change a little bit so they're not all the same. So let's go ahead and change that to 2x 15 degrees. The Y went 2x. Let's go ahead and add an extra 300 degrees of rotation to this one. And on the Z, let's back this down to actually one rotation and 325 degrees. So for the few that we selected, which were the 4 that I had, we'll see that they go through and these will change, which will give us a little bit of variation inside of that. So once you have those, you can go back and you can select some other ones. So we can come in here and say, all right, well, we've selected those ones. So I'm just going to go ahead and click away. And you'll be able to see the ones that are turned are ones that were already in there and selected. So it doesn't matter what we go through and choose which ones you get or how much even changes that you make for them. Because, again, these are going to move as we go in. So I'm going to go ahead and come in here and select, I'm going to select 5 different ones this time. And for those 5 that we have in here selected, we want to go ahead and let's go ahead and bring up our rotation as well. Making sure that you do change the rotation for one that is selected, since I didn't close up the rest of mine to keep it clean. We see here brown, it's highlighted, so therefore this one will need to be changed. Any of them that were recently changed, remember we did start with them all at 2x. So therefore with 2-time rotation, we see these other ones that have changed. We know that those are actually ones that were changed previously. So when we get in here, you can go ahead and you can select any values you want to go in and work with. So maybe you want to take this and let's change the first one to 1 and we'll do a 165. We'll come down here to the Y rotation and let's go ahead and make this, we'll make that one rotate 3 times plus 155 degrees. And the other on, we'll leave that at 2, but we'll add in another 90 degrees of rotation. And then we can go in here, we can see what happens to those, what do those look like, where they're at. So we can see where those are as they turn. So if we click away, we can see where the other leaves currently are at. You could always go through and scrub as well and see what's going to happen with them as they come in to that. Now, if you want to, you can go in and ultimately do additional selections. If you want all of them to start to move, if you're okay with some of them remaining flat, then that's perfectly fine as well. Once you're happy with what you have on there, we can go ahead then and I'm going to save that. And then let's go ahead and I'm going to come down here and make sure nothing is selected. And going to go ahead and hit U. Remember, is the Uber key. So you can toggle shut all of the transform stuff that was down there. So at this point, I am done with transformations. I'm going to set this to fit up to 200%. I'm going to hit the home key to go back to the beginning, and let's hit the space bar so we can see the leaves coming in here. And after those go through, they look good. I'm happy with how those go through and play out. If you don't like the way your leaves ultimately come into there, you can go back to that 120 mark and you can go ahead and adjust some of the rotations, because remember, from 120 out to that 210 mark, all they're doing is falling straight down. So for me, there's like, I think 8 or so that are still flat. You may want to change them. Because of the motion, the way they come in, and they ultimately fall off, to me it's not distracting, so I'm going to leave them just as they are. So up to here, we've been working with the objects, but now we want to go and we want to start to look at lighting. So inside of After Effects, when we talk about a light, it's actually a layer. So we are creating a layer that actually shines then light onto our other layers. There's 4 different types of lights that we can work with inside of here. There's a parallel, a spot, a point, and an ambient light. And as we go through and start to work with them, all of them have various different settings that we can go through and modify how the light actually gets placed on there. Now as we go through and we start talking about lights, by default they do actually have an area of interest or a point of interest, and that's where we're actually focusing the light inside of the scene. So depending on whether it's straight on or whether it's pointing down lower, will change the way that we have inside of this. So what we want to do is we want to go in and we're going to create ourselves just simply a pale yellow ambient light inside of here. That's going to go in there to help cast some shadows onto the scene and also control a little bit more about what we have for the mood of this windy day that we're creating inside of here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the home key. It's going to take us back to the beginning. Remember, this is the time in which all of the leaves are off of the composition. We do want to make sure that no layers are selected. You can go ahead and hold down Function and hit F2 just to be sure of that. And we're going to go and we're going to create ourselves a new layer. So we have Layer, New, and up here you'll see Light. So let's go ahead and click on that, and immediately our light settings dialog box is going to pop up. Inside of here, for the name, we're going to go ahead and call this Fall Light. Inside of here, we also then, as I mentioned, we have the different light types. If you click on that, you're going to see the drop down. There are the 4 that we talked about: parallel, spot, point, and ambient. For this, we want to go ahead and select ambient light. And then here, this is the color of our light. So if we go ahead and we click on that, you're going to get a light color dialog box that's going to come up. With that, we can go ahead, once again, we can drag to get the color we want, or we can go ahead and key ourselves in a value. So 239, 244, and 161 is what is used inside of here, and we say OK. That's the light color. We come inside of here, we see that we have intensity. So how intense is the light going to be? But depending on what we're working with, some of these are available, some of these are not available. If they are grayed out, it just does not apply to that individual light that's there. So with that set, we're going to come down here and click on OK. So we've just gone in and we've created ourselves a fall light. Now as we go through and we use this, or once this is on here, what you're going to notice with that is that there's nothing being applied to that background. Why is nothing being applied to the background? First off, we have that locked. Secondly, then, we need to go in and turn this into a 3D layer and ultimately make the sky a 3D layer, so it's going to go through and begin to work with it. So the sky is 3D. Once I go through and add that, you're going to notice that now we're going to see that that lighting effect is on there. Because we're going and we're creating a light. As we create the light's designed to go in and cast and catch shadows. Since we don't have that in a 3D plane, the light is not going to go through and impact that until we go in and ultimately make the sky layer a 3D layer. So now we go through and we have that sky layer set. What we're going to do is we're going to work with the opacity of that sky layer. So let's go ahead and select the sky layer, which is all the way at the bottom of your stack. And we're going to hit T, which is just going to open up our opacity. Now with the opacity down there right now, it is currently at 100%. We want to go ahead and create that initial keyframe at the very beginning here for that. So we're going to go ahead and toggle on the stopwatch next to our opacity setting inside of that sky layer. Then we're going to jump up 2 seconds. Once again, we can drag this to the 2-second mark so you can watch everything coming in and moving. And we're going to stop here at 2 seconds. It will go through and ultimately render out that frame. And then we need to go ahead and adjust the opacity at this point down to 0. So it's going to go through and disappear, which is going to take us out to this black portion of this. So now we can go through and we can see the whole composition. Since we did change that sky layer to a 3D layer, you should notice your gizmo right in the center of the screen. So if we wanted to change, rotate, do other things to it, we could do that there, which would cause your sky to then begin to change the way it's positioned. Since there isn't keyframing on that, the sky would just sit in whatever position you ultimately change that to. So once you have that set, we can go ahead and collapse back down then our opacity. It's here. I'm going to go ahead and save that. We go back to home. Go ahead and press the space bar. You can watch as it comes in there. There are the leaves blowing in. The first time that it runs, depending on how much stuff you have and how your computer's operating, it may take a little bit longer. You'll notice the green bar coming across there, indicating to us that it is currently rendering the frames as it goes through and plays. And then once it does the first one, you'll see it's going to go through and you'll see the leaves coming onto there and ultimately falling off to the bottom. So now we're happy with what we have there. Now we can see as we look at what is on here that we have all of these layers. And we're asking to go through and ultimately render the layers. And then we are trying to not modify what is there. So to make this easier and to clean up our timeline, we're going to go ahead and pre-compose everything on here with the exception of our last leaf. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to make sure that we select, in this case, I'm going to click on red and I'm going to hold down shift and I'm going to go all the way up to the top to my fall light. And then I'm going to hold down command and click on sky. That just allows us to go in and select them. You could also click on sky, go all the way to the top, hold down shift, click on the top layer, which will be your light. And then we could come down and hold down command and click on last leaf to exclude it from the selection. But all we want to do is make sure that we select everything except for the last leaf. And we're going to go ahead and come up to the top. We're going to do layer pre-compose. It's going to be all the way down at the bottom. We also have command shift C. We'll run that as well. It's going to come up and give our pre-compose panel. What do we want to do with this? We're going to call this red leaf media, if I can type, media. And with it, we want to make sure it says move all attributes into the new composition. We're going to go ahead and say OK. And then you'll find that it goes through there and cleans up what is there. So there are all our leaves coming onto there. So now we have them all in the one as opposed to all the different layers that are inside of there. And actually on that, that is our falling leaves, not our red leaf media. So I'm going to go ahead and change that on there because now I've got two that are on there that have the same name to them. So we have our falling leaves composition inside of here. And we want to go ahead, we're going to change the duration of that one. So because of what I just did, need to come up here. Figure out which is which. Okay, so this one here, the second one should be called falling leaves. There we go. So if you had named it wrong, you just need to come back up here, open up the composition, figure out which one is correct, and then rename that. So that's the falling leaves one. So if I were to open that up inside of here, we'll see all of the things. So there is just the falling leaves. You'll notice that it deals with the black, but we don't have the last leaf on there. So as we go through to work with it. If we come back over into our settings then, we want to change the length of this falling leaves one that is up inside of here. So we have the falling leaves composition. So that's one right now as it goes through. We know that once it gets out there to the 210 mark, that nothing else changes, right? So when we come out here, fall down, and then we get to that point at 210, they're off the screen. So there's no sense in having this continue to be playing or continue to be a part of that at that point. So what we're going to do is we're going to come up here to our falling leaves. We're going to go ahead and select that falling leaves composition inside of our project panel. And just come up here to composition, composition settings, or shortcut Command K. And we want to make some adjustments to this. So inside of here, down here for our duration, right now it's set to 4 seconds. Let's just go ahead and change this to 215. Once we have that set, we can go ahead and click on OK. So now you'll see if you had it open inside of the timeline that now the duration runs to 215. And then we jump over here in our Red Life Media. You'll see here at 215, then it now cuts off for our falling leaves. So once the leaves have finally fallen, they're all the way off, that's when we're going to have then the final logo, which is that last leaf layer. And ultimately we're going to have some extruded text should actually appear and move to the center of the screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to move this last leaf into location first, and then we'll go in and we'll bring in our text and place our text so that we can work with it. So we're going to go ahead and select this last leaf. Let's go ahead and bring it to the center of our composition. If you're not getting it to snap, make sure that up on the top of your screen you have snapping turned on. Now it is going to go off of the line, so see if we can pick a spot. That's going to be close enough for me. So you should have that centered on that black background. I'll go ahead and save that. So again, we haven't moved anything else. So if we go through and we start to scrub through here, you should see that those are going. And ultimately, we have our last leaf sitting in the middle of that. So that's what we're going to go through, and we can see the placement of it. So now you should have that positioned into the center. So this is where it's going to be at the end. So we're going to go ahead and go all the way to the end of our composition. So it's going to be, say, 323. Remember, it was at 4 seconds because it's the last frame, that 323 mark. So once we go all the way out there to the end, remember, this is the last place that we want this to be at. So we're going to build it from here. So that way, as everything comes in, it's in the spot that we want it in. And then ultimately, if we wanted this to move into this location, we set that last frame, and then we transition everything to it. So this is currently in its place. What we want to do is we want to add ourselves some text to this. So we're going to go ahead and grab our horizontal type tool. And I'm going to click out here on this, and we're going to type in red. Now as we go through and work with this, whatever you want to use for it, they use Bradley hand. Whether or not that's on your machine, you have to look and see. There's Bradley hand, so we can go ahead and we can select that. As we go through and work with the stroke, we want our stroke to be none. So if there isn't the red slash through it, go ahead and click right here where it says no stroke color. And we want to go ahead and we want to choose a color that matches up, or we're going to choose a color that matches up with it. I can see just a little bit of my red here, so I'm going to click on the eyedropper. I'm going to come out here, I'm just going to click on that last leaf. It's going to allow me to go ahead and change the color to match with what is there. So Bradley hand bold, there's our red color, no stroke. And then for the size on this, we're going to use 200 pixels. So if we click inside of here to highlight it, it will allow us to go and type in 200 pixels. Now, if you don't have your text selected and you are just on the layer and you change the size, it will go up. If you actually don't have it, if you have your text selected and you don't click on this and you start to type 200 by accident, it is going to change your text. So if I hovered over it right now, I hadn't clicked on it and I typed 200, oh, it's going to allow me to do that. It should usually it'll go through. If you're not on there, it will actually go in and it'll change what your text says out there. But it's going to go through and allow me to change the size. So intuitively, it now will recognize that that's what they think you're trying to do with that. So we have that to 200. So our red is nice and large. Once we have that, let's go ahead and we'll deselect. We'll take our type tool, we'll click out here once again, and we'll go in with leaf. Then I'll click away, click again, then we'll do media. Now you may have noticed that as we go in there, if we look at the ones that I have actually have small caps. That's because inside of my character panel, small caps is turned on. If I turn that off, you'll notice then it goes back out and takes away the all caps. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that small caps isn't turned on. So now we should have red life media. It looks just like this. They are all three separate layers. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and we want to position this around here. So I'm going to grab my media. We're going to bring it down here to the bottom. Now once we have this set, once you position things, remember you can use your arrow keys up, down to nudge. If you hold down shift as you nudge things, it goes in increments of 10. So it's going to move the same as 10 nudges if we go through and begin to decide where we want this. So I'm going to go ahead and position that right about there. Now when I get to my red, I want my red in my leaf to actually be at angles going around the leaf itself. So I'm going to go ahead and select red. And I'm going to jump in here to my rotation. So I'm just going to hit R for my rotation. And I'm going to set this to negative 45 degrees. And I'll toggle that closed. I'll bring this down here to go up around this area. And then I want my leaf, it's going to be on the other side. And it's also going to be rotated, but it's going to be rotated 45 degrees. So let's go ahead and hit my rotation. Key in 45. Once again, I'll hit U to collapse that down. Then we can bring this over here so it's around what we have on here. So there's my look to mine red leaf media. Now if you went in and didn't have Bradley handy, you chose a different font, you would probably want to go ahead and adjust the size so that we look at it from a proportional standpoint that it looks about right. So now we want to go in and look at different ways to work with it. Now inside of here we have Cinema 4D as a renderer, which allows us to go through and control our attributes a little bit differently. So let's go ahead and inside of your timeline, we're going to make sure that our falling leaves composition is all the way at the top of the layer stack. So we'll come in here, grab falling leaves, bring them all the way up to the top. Let's drop that into its location. Now once we have that inside of there, we want to go ahead and we want to take our media to our last leaf because these are all things that are going to be working together. So select media, hold down shift, select last leaf, or if you're working from bottom to top, click on last leaf, hold down shift, and then click on the media layer at the top of that. Now we want to go ahead and let's turn on our 3D properties for this. So we're going to click on the 3D box. So now our media, leaf, red, and last leaf are all going to be turned into 3D layers. So we go in and we expand out what we have for our properties. So once we bring that out, it's just one of the disclosure arrows. What you're going to find then is that we get our text, we see our transform, geometry options, and material options. Unless you're looking at last leaf, which goes into the contents, transform, geometry options, and material options. So up here on our media layer, we see that we have geometry options. Let's go ahead and let's toggle that down. Now as we go in and we look at what is inside of here. This is our bevel style. We have our bevel depth. And we have an extrusion depth that we can go in and work with. Now depending on what machine you're working on, what controls you have, you may also see then inside of here the ability to change what you have set for a renderer. So on the right hand side of this you may see some blue text that says change renderer. In this case we can't go in and change this to a Cinema 4D because it's not included inside of this, so our machine isn't set up for it. If so, you can actually click on that, which would give you then the option to come up and adjust what you have for your renderer sitting on here. What you'll also find when you go through and look at things, if we get into our composition and composition settings, inside of here for our 3D renderer, ours is already set then to default on Cinema 4D. So in this case, it's not going to have us change it. There's Classic 3D and Cinema 4D. Since this is already set to Cinema 4D, we don't have the change renderer set up in there. If you wanted to change it to something else, you could do that inside of here to go back to a Classic 3D. So unlike, like I said, what will be represented inside the book where you can change it there, ours is set to 4D, Cinema 4D by default, so therefore the option isn't in that setting. So we have that set on there. Inside of this though, we look at the options, we also then have our bevel style. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and bring this down here and say concave. So now we're going to go through, it's going to start to work with this. What's the importance of this? Well, it's how is it going to treat the light as the light goes through and hits it. And we'll ultimately be going in and adding some additional lights yet. So we'll be able to see what's going to happen as it hits the setup. So in this case, our bevel style goes to concave. So if we come down here and we look at one for leaf, you'll notice that in leaf it's also concave, because as we change one, it goes through and changes each of them. So we have that set to concave. We come down here to our extrusion depth. Now this is how much does it extrude. We're talking about an extrusion that's going to go through and take the material and push it back. So we're going to expand out how much material is inside of there. So we're going to set that to 50. So now as we go through and work with it, we have expanded out what is there. So if we go ahead and come in here and deselect all of our layers. We can start to see that there's a change to what we have on our text. But right now as we start to look at these, they're extruded. Now you may look at them and see that they're just a little bit almost like puffier, inflated to them. And that's just because now we're starting to talk about depth. There's things moving back behind it. But we can also start to look at things from our different views. So as we come in here to our composition panel, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and start to look at what's available to us. So how are we going in and ultimately viewing what is here? So let me come in here. Just going to toggle up all of these. So we're going to go ahead and change what it is that we're actually viewing with this. We hover over these, we see the different layers. We also see right now it's set up down here for, we can turn on draft 3D, which will actually speed things up. There's our render as well. We also then over here in the right, we see that we have the control of the different views. So right now we're on a one view. We can go to two views. It's going to show us two separate views. Now you'll see how thick that is. That's the extrusion depth. If we come over here and change this to four views, it's going to go through and render those out. Now, depending on your machine, it's going to play into whether or not you're able to render these out and see these both on processing power and also on actual real estate. The fact that we have these 27-inch monitors, we can easily see all four of our views inside of here. Now, each one of these views, we can go through and begin to work with. So you'll see if we click on it, when you get these little blue triangles in the corner, that's going to let you know that is the current view that is active. Why is that important? Because down here when we look at what we can select for the view, it's going to change that one that is there. So if I come over and I click on my front view, and I have my front view as an active view, I can actually go ahead and I can change this from front to custom view 3. And you'll see it goes in there and changes the way that that view is. So it does allow us to go in and change. If we come in here and we hover over these and scroll, you'll see we can zoom in and out. If I click my top view, and I come back over here and look and go to custom view 1, it's a different look for it. So when you go through, we can adjust what it is that we're seeing inside of these. This does allow us to go through now and really see what's happening as we go in and start to work with or view the extrusions that are available to us. So you should be able to go in and see those options. Now, another thing that comes in as we go through and we start to work with that is different tools that are available to us inside of here. So as we come in here and we start to work with things, what exactly are we seeing? What are we controlling? What are we working with? The tools to control how we're looking even at these views is up here inside of our toolbar. We're going to see here, this is our orbit around. We also allow us to go into pan, and then we also allow us to dolly. These are all 3D tools that are available to us as we come in and view it. So if I come in and click on this, this is going to allow me to go in and drag this. Now, as we go in and drag it, you're going to see that it will become pixelated, but does allow us to go through and drag that view around. We come in here, we come and look at our pan tool. What's going to happen with this? Well, you'll see here, it's almost like we're moving it left or right. And then lastly, we go through and we talk about our dolly. So we can slide ourselves in, move the camera in closer to it, or ultimately go through and move our camera away from there. So those are controls that we have with that. That is a custom view. If I went through and decided to change that to be a top view, you'll see it goes right back to the top view. If I wanted this to be a front view, it will jump back to the front view. So as you go through and you start to work with it, the other thing you'll see up here, this one says active camera. That's letting you know whichever camera is currently there. So you'll see it is still set to what is there, because as we created that 3D, essentially it has a default position for our individual camera that is there. So as you start to look at what's happening, how do we go through and control those items? This is our default camera. So we go through and we start to look at our view. That's by default what we're seeing. So when you think back to when we created the composition, we were viewing it from some position. That position was that default camera that was there. We can go ahead and we can go in though and create ourselves a custom camera. So when we go through to start to build it, let's go ahead and let's make sure we deselect all of our layers on here. And we're just gonna go layer a new camera. With that, we'll see our camera settings that are showing up. It's going to let us know what's going to go through and happen with this. So as we go in to use this underneath of the name, we'll just go ahead and leave this set as camera 1. And we're going to go down here for our preset. Let's go ahead and change this over to 20 millimeters. And then we'll just simply go ahead and click on OK. Now, as we do that, what's going to happen is you're now going to see, with that selected, where's the camera at? Where's the camera pointing to? And we talk about that point of focus or point of interest. With that, that's going to indicate where exactly is this going in and where is it pointing to with that. So it'll show what we're looking at based upon the current camera, which is camera 1. So now we have that inside of here. Your scene may change just a little bit, whether we toggle the camera on or off. You'll see where it's going in. You'll notice a little bit of difference. So all I'm doing is toggling the visibility from camera 1 on and off. So as I toggle that off, you'll notice that the camera's changed just a little bit. So based upon where that's at, we're going to see a little change with it, because the camera that we created was 20 millimeter. The default camera was, I think, set to 50. So it will change a little bit as to where it's at and what we are ultimately able to view. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to jump over here to my views. I'm going to switch these over to 2 views. And what I'm going to have on here is on the left view, I want to go ahead and make that the right view of it. And then what we have on this other part is going to be our active camera. So when we go and we toggle that on, what we're going to see is we have that coming into there. So if I click on the camera itself, what we're going to see then is that point of interest. So it's shining in at the point of interest, which is sitting right here on it. So we're going to go ahead and make sure we're at the actual end of our area here. And let's go ahead and hit P for the position of our camera. This is where we want this to ultimately end at. So let's go ahead and we're going to toggle on our stopwatch. If we start to drag this back, we're going to see then there's going to be leaves coming on to our composition, moving through our composition. So we're going to take this back to about the 108 mark. So we still see a little bit of our background, the sky, and we also then have the leaf on there. So as these come in, they're tumbling around. Let's go ahead and let's adjust the position values of our camera 1. Now we have it keyframed there at the end, so we know at this point the camera is just going to begin to move. So on our position, we're going to do a negative 2,000 for the X. We're going to do a positive 2,000 for the Y. And we're going to do a negative 2,000 for the Z. So it's going to change the angle of it. And if you look over here on this left side, remember we can zoom out. We can see where's the camera actually at. What's the point of interest there going towards the center. So the camera's actually going to rotate and bring itself up to that final position, which is going to allow us to go in and see what's going on. So as we go through and we start to look at it, why are we animating the camera versus the layers? Because it's much easier for us to control the animation of one individual object, this being the actual camera, than it is to go through and deal with 4 separate layers, rotation values, and everything with them. So we go and we have this set. So we have our camera set, and we have 2 keyframes. The first one here, what we just created, we have the second one out over here. Well, let's go ahead and let's right click on our second keyframe out there. And let's go into our keyframe assistant and say easy ease in. Remember, as we talk about our keyframes, think of them like train stations. If we're want to slow it down as it gets to that one, we're easing into the station. If we want to slowly ramp up as it's actually making the transition, we're going in there and we're easing out of the station. So we have our position properties all set for that. We can go ahead and toggle them back closed. So again, we're still at the 108 mark. So let's go ahead and come in here. We have our media layer here. Let's go ahead and select that. And we're going to go ahead and hold down Shift and go to our last leaf. So these are the different objects. When we go through and we select them, we are at that 108 mark. You will notice all of your widgets in the center of the screen. You may notice maybe a little bit change in size for those. With all of those selected, at this point, this is when we want those to actually be visible. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and set ourselves an endpoint at this time. So if we hold down Option and we go ahead and click the left bracket, or some people say begin bracket, that's going to go ahead and set our endpoint. So that's when this will actually become visible to us. Up until this point, it's not on the screen anywhere. At this point, we also want to go ahead and select our camera layer, and we're going to set our camera layer with an endpoint at this time as well. Because up to this point, we're just running off of that default camera setup. So when we go through and we run this, you'll see it comes in, bump, 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 and then the camera's going to come up. This is when the camera is actually going to navigate, and if you scrub across there, you can see really ugly pixelation as things come up and rotate themselves into place. If you want to see this play itself out, I would go ahead and save. Anytime you go and you start getting into heavy animation, I do recommend you save before you preview, especially if you didn't save recently, in case it does shut down. It has happened to me enough times that I rarely forget to hit save before I go through and do any type of preview. So I have that set. We go ahead and hit the space bar. Going to preview itself in. You'll find that once it gets to the part of all of the animating content and camera on that it's going to slow itself down. We can go ahead and watch that play. And then once it gets in here, we'll find that we have this red leaf media, but at this point it's not the most interesting thing that's there. So what we're going to do is we want to go in, and we're ultimately going to go in and add ourselves a little bit more lighting, and then we'll ultimately come in and work with the material so that we don't just have this plain flat red logo that we're working with. So let's go ahead and add a spotlight to this first. So make sure you're all the way at the end. In my case, I'm at 322, but I need one more frame, so 323. And we're going to go ahead and make sure nothing is selected inside of here. And let's go ahead and create ourselves a new light. So again, layer, new light. It'll come up. There it says ambient light 1. We're not going to use an ambient light for this. We want to go ahead and choose a spotlight. So I'm going to call it spotlight. And we come in here to our light type. We're going to go ahead and choose spot. We want this to have just a little bit of a tint to this. So we're going to come in here. We're going to bring this up to 248, 249, and lastly 242. So with that, it's a white, but it does give us a little bit of color as well. So we're going to say OK. Now you'll notice, unlike when we went with ambient light, we do have the ability to control intensity, the cone angle, and the cone feather. So we go through and we start looking at the cone angle. How large is the angle inside of there? We go ahead and look at the feather. We start dealing with the softness of that. So let's go ahead and let's make some adjustments to this. So from our intensity, we're going to leave that all the way up at 100%. We're going to adjust our cone angle, if not already, at 290 degrees. And we're going to set our cone feather to 50. As we go through to work with lights, as you start to work with them, you'll start to see values changing with them. We're going to leave our fall off set to none. We do want to come down here and click on cast shadows. If you don't turn this on, it means this light's going to hit an object, but it won't create a shadow behind it. There are times when you are going to want shadows. There are times when you're not going to want shadows. So when we go through and start to think about that, do you want this light to create a shadow, yes or no? Even when we go and we start to work with objects in 3D and choosing objects, we can go in and we can select objects to not cast shadows. So in this case, for the light, we're going to tell it to go ahead and cast shadows. Now down here we have our shadow darkness. How dark do we want our shadows? We're going to set our shadows off of this to 50%, and then we want to go ahead and diffuse them out over the course of 150 pixels. So once we go through and we have that set, like I said, this is what we're going for on here. So we went to spot, intensity is 100, cone angle is 90 degrees, cone feathers at 50%, fall off none, cast shadows is checked on, shadow darkness is at 50%, and shadow diffusion is at 150. If for some reason you're not seeing the ability to change shadow darkness and shadow diffusion, once again, just check and make sure you have cast shadows turned on. Once you're okay with that, we can go ahead and click on OK. You'll see the new light show up there. There's the cone that's coming into that. So now if you look at your red leaf media, you're going to see that we now have gone in and highlighted that. So now we're starting to get a little bit of form show up on it. Now, if you look closely at it, you can see where the extrusion is for your actual text. Since we're pretty much right on top of the leaf, you're not going to really notice anything for the extrusion of the leaf itself. We go in and start to look at what's happening with it. What we have here is there's your point of interest. So right where that bullseye is actually at is going to go through and indicate to you that is where it is going in and shining toward. So if you wanted the highlight to be somewhere else, you could go ahead and adjust that. Now that I'm zoomed in a little bit here, you'll be able to see, if you look now, you can see right there, it's the extrusion. You can see where the shape comes out, and you can see the change in the color. Also, when we go and remember we want concave. So that's why we're seeing the edges are lifted up, because it's creating that bowl shape into our text. So if you're unsure of what it is that you're seeing in there, you can go in and work with that. If having the multiple views is bothering you, you can still always go back to a single view. One advantage to having this view from the side here is that it does allow us to see where the cone's coming in at, where are my objects at, so you can see just the edge of the extrusions here. So we can see where's the light coming in and hitting what is on here. So we've gone and we've created this spotlight on it. Just to add a little bit more drama to it, let's go ahead and add ourselves one more new light. So we're going to go ahead, I'm going to deselect on here. We're going to add ourselves a fill light. So if we come into layer, new light. On here, we're going to go ahead and call this fill light. And for this, we have our parallel point and ambient light. In this case, we want to go ahead and we're going to create ourselves another ambient light to it, which is going to help fill in what is going on with it. Plus, it allows us to control, in this case, add a little bit of color to it as well. So for this, we're going to go ahead and give this just a little bit of a blue. So on that, our red's going to be at 179, green 221. If you're only at 22, you're going to have a nice lavender color instead. And 244 for that. So again, it's just a soft light blue to it. We'll say OK on there. We come down here to our intensity. We don't want this to match up with the 100% that we had on the other light. So we're going to back this down just a little bit to 65. Then we'll go ahead and we'll say OK. And we'll see a little bit of a shift. And then at this point, by adding the additional light onto there, what we have with that is we have the ability, you'll see, to see the extrusions even more because we have more light inside of our space. So we go ahead and we start to drag this. We can see how that light goes through and begins to change with it. So you can just kind of scrub a little bit or even back out here, let it render itself out. Now you can really see what's happening with our object that is here. So we've gone and we've built this up, and now we want to go in and the fact that we've created this object, we have lights that will create shadows. Let's go in and look at casting shadows and also beginning to set some basic material properties. So like I said, this looks a lot better. We can see the extrusions to it. It's obviously three-dimensional as we go in and look at our shape. So let's go ahead and let's select this last leaf layer. And then we're going to go ahead and hold down Shift and come up to Media, because the last leaf and the text that's all on there are all made out of the same material. We have them all coming up. They're all treated the same. So we want to go ahead and add items to these. So with all of these selected, we're going to go ahead and AA. And you got to tap it relatively quick. You can't just hit A and then A like we can with the Uber key. But if we hit AA, you're going to see then it's going to expand out all of these properties on us. So we have our geometry options will be expanded. All our material options will be expanded as well. This is going to allow us to go in and begin to work with what is here. So if we go down and we look inside of our material options, what you're going to notice inside of our material options is that we see this ability to cast shadows. Now on the cast shadows, if your cast shadows is set to off, it's not going to cast any shadows onto any other three-dimensional objects. So with that, we want to go ahead and make sure we click on that and make it say on. You don't want to click twice to where it says only. So we want to go ahead and make sure you just click the one time to where we get it to say on. At this point now, these are actually going to cast shadows based upon how the lights are hitting them, where the lights are hitting them in directions as well. Now inside of here, we do have the ability to go in and work with what's happening with the layers. How are they actually interacting with the light itself? So with that, we have our specular intensity. This is going to go through and determine how much of the light it goes through and ultimately reflects from it. So when we come down here, we have a specular intensity. We're going to back this down to a 35. And then we have our specular shininess. So when we start to think about this, think metallics. Right now, if you look at what it appears like, it's very flat. Well, if we go in and we up this shininess to, let's say, 15, now what's going to happen with that is it's going to start to actually have a little bit more of a metallic look to it. Now what happens if you take that way up? It'll go through and it should end up, once we render out, have a bit more of a shine to it, or again, we can back that down to 15. Once we have that set, we can go ahead and let's deselect all layers. So F2. And then I'm going to hit my Uber key, so UU, which is just going to close everything up that is there. And I'm going to go ahead and make sure that we save it. Now we can go ahead, home, and preview. We can watch this go through and begin to run. Once it plays itself all the way out, if you're happy with where things are at, we'll go in and we can render this out. The other thing too, as you go through and work with it, if for some reason you don't like the way all of the leaves ended up going, we could always go back over to our falling leaves. We can modify these. But once you are happy with it, we can go ahead and we can take our composition and we can go ahead and we can add this to our render queue. So if we go in and decide to add to render queue, we can go ahead and decide what settings do we want to go in and work with. So output, I'm gonna go quick time, format. I'm gonna use my ProRes. Okay. Everything else looks good there. Output 2. Go to lesson 12. Finish project. Save that and then go ahead and render this. And it's going to go through. We can watch it render. In this case, I still have two views up. They're both going to look the same. But this will allow it to continue through. Remember, rendering is going to be all based upon how fast your machine is, what else you have open, how much other things are going on. I do recommend that as you go through, as you start to work with your renderings, that you minimize other tasks that are going on with it. So if you have other applications open, especially Adobe apps, Photoshop, Illustrator, anything like that, that you close up any resource hogs. But as it goes through, you'll see it's rendering itself out. Now at this point, when we get into here, since the leaves have fallen off, you'll see it'll render a little bit faster because at this point, remember, we're just moving a camera. Well, yes, it's rendering each frame of our logo that's in 3D. We have multiple lights that are on it. So as we add lights, as we go through and adjust the content, note that is going to increase what you have for your render time. So you've probably noticed if you've been rendering out 2D animations that they render much faster than 3D animations because we're not dealing with the environments and that as well. So once it goes through and finishes up, if we go ahead and navigate back out to where we have placed this, and this is in lesson 12 folder, finish project. Here we'll find our movie. So we can go ahead and play that. So there we can see the leaves coming on, falling themselves down, and then we ultimately end with this final object. So this does allow us to go in. We can work in 3D. Think about different ways that we can deal with and work with content, both 2D forms and also in 3D forms, and don't be afraid to go in and play with that.